Annie Denver has been mostly unknown outside of her role as songwriter of John Denver's iconic love ballad, Annie's Song, for quite some time. Was the unassuming inspiration, the voice behind the song, who shied away from discussing their private romance in public. Annie has decided to finally speak up, despite the fact that she is 78 years old. Annie is speaking at this very moment for what reason? Was an affair involved? Who was the man who sang her name to the globe? And what transpired between them? The truth behind their lauded love story, the intricacies of living with a world-renowned superstar, and her personal hardships were all laid bare. It was stunning and incredibly honest to hear this truth. It has the potential to alter your opinion of these two famous people. In the middle of Minnesota, on January 10, 1946, Annie Martell came into this world. The peaceful and traditional Midwest, with its humble lifestyle and emphasis on family, religion, and community, had a profound impact on her formative years. Natural wonders such as forests, lakes, and snowy winters were always there for Annie to enjoy as a child. Her early years were formative for the peaceful power and serenity that would accompany her throughout her life. Although she had no desire for stardom or attention, her life took a dramatic change when she met a young man whose career would propel him to renown on a global scale. John Denver, whose real name was Henry John Duckendorf, Jr., was that man. Their first meeting was far from the glamorous Hollywood affair that would come to characterize their relationship. They had a closer, more genuine, intimate, and respectful relationship based on warmth and mutual respect. John had just begun his music career when he met Annie. He was still attempting to establish himself. He hadn't yet become the internationally renowned folk singer whose sweet tenor voice and soulful lyrics made him a chart topper. There was an irresistible quality to his aura even back then, and Annie was captivated by him because of her steady demeanor. The rapid progress of their relationship is evidence of how strong their bond is. The couple wed on June 9, 1967, following a short courtship. Their marriage was the first chapter in a love affair that would go down in music history books. John was not yet famous, but he was deeply committed to his music and inspired by his imagination, driven to achieve their goals. Being by his side, Annie became a subtle but significant force in his life, providing him with emotional support and encouragement. She was more than just an observer, a wife. During a time of profound creative aspiration and personal development, she served as his emotional rock. Annie and John lived in a number of locations after being married, including Edina, Minnesota, and Chicago. They started their life together in the late 60s and early 70s, when John was still establishing himself as a musician and they lived cheaply. Those were the early years of a very modest lifestyle. Long hours, frequent travel, and hard work were the ingredients for success. Despite all the difficulties, there was also joy, laughter, and the pursuit of common goals. As John performed, wrote, and toured, Annie was by his side, frequently stepping aside to provide assistance to the man she cared about. As their friendship blossomed, something remarkable occurred in January 1973. John Denver penned a tune that would define his career and win over millions of listeners all over the globe. Annie was the one who wrote that song. Composed in few minutes, the song was inspired by John's love for Annie and a moment of serenity he felt while skiing in Aspen, Colorado. It was an impromptu display of his feelings, a memorial to the woman who had enriched his life with her presence. Lyrically, the song conveys profound love and adoration for Annie. It's like a night in the forest, you fill my senses. Shortly after its debut, the song soared to the top of the Billboard charts and cemented its place as one of the most recognizable love songs of all time. It was an unusual and complicated experience for Annie to hear a song that was so deeply about her, and then have it become extremely successful. On the one hand, her husband's public display of affection was a lovely thing to do. On the other side, it signaled a change in her personal life, which was suddenly, to an extent, accessible to everyone. She had never desired fame or the title of muse, but all of a sudden, she was immortalized in a song that resounded on radios all over the world, thanks to her role in John's life. She stayed committed to her family and the life she was creating with John, even when the pressures of celebrity and the increasing attention she was receiving became overwhelming. The pair made yet another pivotal choice in the 1970s, when John's career was at its peak. The couple took in Zachary and Anna Kate, two kids they had adopted. During this time, their relationship took on new significance, and they found a sense of stability amidst the chaos of celebrity life. The experience of becoming a mother had a profound impact on Annie. As she and her children navigated the increasingly public world, she embraced the job with passion and devotion, doing her best to offer stability and affection. The decision to adopt was significant and well considered. It was a reflection of the couple's hope to have a family of their own and to leave an impression that goes beyond fame and music. They found fulfillment, purpose, and a stronger bond to their family via raising Zachary and Anna Kate. John found joy and purpose in raising his children. They were Annie's anchor, keeping her rooted in reality even when everything else seemed chaotic and uncertain. John Denver and Annie's contentious separation. Annie Martell Denver's life was much more nuanced than the simple love song that bears her name would imply. It is commonly known for its profound link to John Denver's music and heart. Annie was a real person, dealing with the emotional toll of fame, the sacrifices she had to make for her career, and the idealized portrayal of a happy celebrity spouse in the media. Even though she kept quiet for a long time, a more difficult period of her life became public knowledge due to the circumstances surrounding her second marriage, which occurred in the 1980s. A life molded by the intense emotional toll of being indelibly associated with a cultural icon, a tumultuous divorce, and relentless media attention. Annie and John Denver filed for a divorce in 1982, following a marriage of 15 years. From the outside looking in, it was the end of a magnificent love story that had changed the public's view of both people and inspired countless love songs. Something unique and enduring had been reflected by their relationship for a lot of admirers. Love, inspiration, and creative harmony come together in this union. But there was more to the story than meets the eye, as is typical with accounts reported from the outside. Annie had a defining and challenging time in her life when the couple split up, even if it wasn't totally unexpected to people closest to them. She had to go from being half of a famous duo to being herself again, all the while being shrouded in the shadow of the music that made her famous all over the globe. There was no peace and quiet during the divorce itself. Even though Annie never made any public comments about the personal issues that caused the marriage to terminate, reports from the time indicated that it was a rocky one. John Denver's own interviews provide the bulk of the information instead. An especially shocking story was when John, in a fit of rage, sliced their marriage bed in half with a chainsaw. People were worried about the mental and emotional toll the connection had on the two people involved when the tale went viral. Although John's actions were indicative of his inner turmoil, Annie had nothing to do with his tantrums. She chose not to react publicly to the spectacle, remaining cool and composed the entire time. In retrospect, that dramatic and significant deed stands out as a prime example of the pressure that the marriage had reached in its last years. No one could handle this level of emotional upheaval, especially with the added scrutiny from the general public. It had to have been particularly trying for Annie, who had never wanted attention. During their marriage, she shared a home with a guy whose likeness graced record covers, had global renown, and personified a whole folk music era in the United States. Although John frequently received compliments for his sincerity and profound emotions, nobody stopped to think about what it must have been like for the woman standing by his side. Being the partner of a worldwide superstar presented Annie with unique and frequently overwhelming problems, which she had spent over a decade handling. Despite being an enormous encouragement and rock during his climb to fame, she too felt the isolation and pressure that came with being in the public eye all the time. Having the media's constant scrutiny was a major stressor for Annie at the time. Their marriage went from being a secret affair to something more than that in the 1970s, when John Denver's star began to rise. Magazines frequently profiled the pair, using them as a metaphor for perfect love, publishing articles about their lives together, and asking questions about their relationship. Many wondered where Annie's song came from, how they parented, and what their everyday routines were like. Annie was wary of being famous, in contrast to John, who was always up for an interview or public appearance. She had never aspired to be a famous celebrity. Instead, she became entangled in it and had to adjust to a world where people could read, analyze, and criticize her every action. Henry John Duckendorf, Jr., better known as John Denver, was born in Roswell, New Mexico, on December 31, 1943. Denver's 1982 divorce is well known. His grandma gave him a guitar when he was little, and he showed an early aptitude for music. This one deed launched him into a career that would come to characterize country and folk music in the United States. Denver discovered constant solace in music despite growing up in a military family that relocated often because of his father's job as an Air Force pilot. In his formative years, he absorbed his father's strict discipline while also developing a subtle but enduring creative energy. He took the stage name John Denver in 1964, a reference to the capital of Colorado, which would subsequently play a significant role in his personal and musical identity. The decision to change the name went beyond just branding. It mirrored his profound affinity for the outdoors and the Rocky Mountains, two places that would later feature prominently in his songs. At the same time that he was discovering his musical voice, Denver was listening to Sweeping Across America, a folk revival movement, for inspiration. Denver became the lead singer for the famous folk group, the Chad Mitchell Trio, in 1965 after joining the group. The exposure and self-assurance he gained from this experience allowed him to go out on his own. His performance and composition abilities were honed during his tenure with the trio. His talent for penning emotionally charged melodies became evident not long after he began penning original songs for the band. Leaving Aboard a Jet Plane, written in 1967, was one of his early successes. Although it did not initially reach the top of the charts for Denver, the song became a huge hit in 1969 thanks to Peter, Paul, and Mary, solidifying Denver's position as a prominent songwriter in the folk scene. This was a watershed event that proved his melodic skills and lyrical sensibilities were well received. In the same year, Denver's Rhymes and Reasons was released as his first solo album. Even though the record didn't do very well, it did set the stage for a successful career. The project's main features included reviving an old jet plane and presenting Denver's distinctive sound to an expanding audience. His ambitions extended far beyond the realm of music composition. His goal in telling stories was to evoke an emotional response from his audience. Poems, Prayers and Promises was his 1971 album. This was the record that catapulted him to stardom. The album included the hit single, Take Me Home, Country Roads, which became a rallying cry for many who missed the good old days and the simpler life. The widespread recognition of Denver's name and his status as an advocate for the common man were both solidified by this song. Much of his work was characterized by a profoundly personal, yet broadly relatable quality. Denver had a spectacular ascent to stardom from 1972 to 1975. His songs Annie's Song, Rocky Mountain High, and Sunshine on My Shoulders catapulted him to the top of the American singer-songwriter charts. In contrast to the chaos around him, his music provided solace with its descriptions of being innocent, hopeful, and genuine. One of his most famous compositions, Annie's Song, was created in 1973 as a public proclamation of love for his wife, Annie Martell. It resonated with listeners all around the globe. One of the best-selling solo musicians of all time was John Denver by 1974. A large portion of his fan base identified with his portrayal as an innocent, peace-loving, and environmentally conscious artist. Being a cultural figure, he went beyond being a mere entertainer. His activism went well beyond the realm of music. During this time, his environmental advocacy started to take a more structured form. More than that, he made conservation and sustainability his platform issues. As presenter of ABC's The John Denver Show in 1975, he brought his music and principles into American homes. The Country Music Association honored him with the Entertainer of the Year award that very year, a tribute to his influential work in the field and his professional achievement as an artist. Denver's popularity transcended genres. People who were like country, folk, and pop music all warmed up to him. Denver maintained a prolific music career and branched out into acting throughout the 76 to 80s. Oh God, co-starring George Burns, was his breakout role in 1977, a humorous piece that captured his optimistic and kind outlook on life. The film expanded his public profile and showcased his versatility as an entertainer, even though he never pursued acting as a full-time job. Moreover, Denver was a co-founder of the environmental education and sustainable lifestyle organization WinStar Foundation in 1976. This action demonstrated a more profound dedication to the earth, something he frequently emphasized in his songs. Raising awareness through his music wasn't enough for him. His goal was to make a difference in the world. Through WinStar, he was able to channel his enthusiasm and provide a forum for group efforts to improve the environment. But his private life was not without its bumps. The Martell divorced Denver in 1982. The breakup of his marriage was a watershed moment in his songwriting career. After that, he started to focus more on introspection and sadness. Despite his outward displays of respect for Annie, his later albums took on a more reflective tone, reflecting the emotional toll of the divorce. The music of John Denver, a man whose life had been characterized for decades by a profound love of nature and an aura of tranquility, had been the center of controversy and arrest. Although he sang about sunny days and country roads, the man behind the music had his own demons that threatened his fame and legacy. The public's perception of John Denver, who had a clean slate before his drunken legal difficulties and terrible death in the early 1990s, started to take a nosedive as the decade wore on. Driving under the influence led to John Denver's 1993 arrest. Given his image as an eco-conscious, family-oriented, and morally upright performer, This occurrence came as a shock to both his legion of admirers and his detractors. In 1994, he was again arrested for driving under the influence the following year. Not only did his public reputation take a major hit with these consecutive arrests, but his personal life hit rock bottom as well. Contrasted strongly with the headlines about his legal troubles was the image of the joyful, guitar-strumming artist. He had long mesmerized listeners with songs that lauded morality and simplicity, but his private troubles revealed a more nuanced picture. Beyond how the public saw them, these incidents had far-reaching consequences. The convictions for driving under the influence resulted in the suspension of Denver's pilot's license, which symbolizes his daring nature and enthusiasm for flying. The ban was a profoundly symbolic and emotional setback for a guy who frequently sung about the liberating power of the open sky and who saw flying as a deeply personal calling. As a crusader for humanitarian causes all around the world, he frequently combined his love of music with his passion for flying, playing in faraway places. His plane wasn't the only one that had to land because of the limitations. They firmly established a crucial aspect of his personhood. Denver kept on with his music and activism despite these obstacles. The DUI arrests cast a long shadow, though. They were a sobering reminder that even the most perfect people have their share of problems. The industry was not as understanding, even though many fans stuck behind them. During this time, Denver had a hard time landing performance gigs and television appearances. His impact on popular culture diminished, yet it never went away entirely. Tragically, John Denver's last chapter in life was defined by an incident that occurred in 1997. He was flying an experimental plane near Pacific Grove, California, when it went down on October 12th of that year. The world was shocked to hear of his death, which sparked discussions on his life, career, and the events leading up to the tragedy. Several important elements that contributed to the tragedy were uncovered during the inquiry conducted by the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB. One of the most significant was a problem with the fuel selecting valve that was built into the plane. The valve, which was situated behind the pilot's left shoulder and was thus difficult to access, made the process of changing fuel tanks a complex and potentially dangerous move while in flight. Denver was trying to swap fuel tanks when he lost control of the plane, according to the NTSB investigation. The fact that Denver was not in compliance with aviation regulations when the disaster occurred further added misery to the already tragic situation. He was unable to lawfully operate an airplane since he had a history of driving under the influence. Questions on pilot accountability and aircraft design in general, as well as Denver's individual choices, arose in response to this detail. People are grieving the death of a musical legend, while others are trying to figure out what got him to fly that day against all the rules and regulations. The aviation industry, and the safety of experimental aircraft in particular, came under scrutiny after the tragedy. Even seasoned pilots may find these planes challenging due to their unusual controls and non-standard features. Denver was partly to blame for the crash because he didn't know how the jet he was piloting worked. Despite the fact that flying without a license was a major rule violation on his part, numerous experts point to poor engineering and inadequate pilot training as contributing factors to the accident. Challenges in John's marriage, an investigation by the Internal Revenue Service, and a tragic plane catastrophe. The last years of John Denver were fraught with scandal, and the public's perception of him, which had previously been a symbol of innocent Americana and tranquil life, became more nuanced once some of his private admissions surfaced. His 1982 divorce with Annie Martell was one of the most private and widely publicized incidents of his life. Even though Annie's song, a touching ballad about their union, was inspired by their real life together, the truth was far more complicated than what many fans imagined. John later confessed in interviews and his memoirs that he had violent outbursts while they were together. His most notorious confession involved slashing their marriage bed in half with a chainsaw in an act of extreme fury as their relationship began to crumble. Much criticism was directed against this time because of how symbolic and shocking it was. It made many question the emotional instability that had been building behind Denver's public image and threw a pall over what seemed like a perfect marriage at the time. Annie Martell's devotion to John Denver's legacy, particularly the heartfelt lyrics, persisted even after their divorce. Nevertheless, the less romantic and more human side of the singer-songwriter was revealed by the shadowy aspects of their connection. These confessions exposed a guy who struggled with controlling his emotions, even though he presented an image of serenity and empathy in his artwork. They also damaged his reputation as a partner. His complicated connection with the country music establishment further added to the intricacy of Denver's career. Rumors circulated among country music insiders, even at John Denver's 1970s peak, that he lacked the gritty authenticity of the genre and was too commercial and pop. Some others in the music industry weren't as enthusiastic as his followers about his catchy songs and meaningful lyrics. In 1975, when Denver received the Entertainer of the Year award from the Country Music Association, the audience witnessed the peak of tension. Instead of accepting the award, co-host Charlie Rich made a bold statement by protesting by setting fire to the announcement envelope on stage. Viewers were surprised, and the industry's divides were exposed by the gesture. Some members of the country music elite began to view Denver in a new light after this incident, which went down in CMA annals as one of the most infamous. He continued to compose music and gain the love of millions of followers despite this. His status as a member of country music's elite would continue to be a point of contention, though. Denver maintained an air of graciousness in his public remarks, but he never tried to hide the fact that he frequently got the silent treatment from more conventional country music fans. He persisted in making music that pushed against genre boundaries and unified people rather than alienating them, because he was certain that music should bring people together, not apart. At about the same time, Denver was under investigation from both the government and the music industry. His complicated financial and economic operations led to an audit by the Internal Revenue Service, IRS, in the 1980s, which had nothing to do with any particular illegal activity. He was a superstar with a complex and openly scrutinizable set of financial records due to the many sources of his income, including music royalties, performances, charitable work, and other endeavors. Criminal charges were not brought forward, despite the fact that the probe garnered public attention. However, on top of all the personal difficulties he was already facing, the audit's very presence added another layer of uncertainty and worry. So, Denver went through a lot of emotional and professional upheaval in the 1980s. He kept releasing music with a more reflective, occasionally gloomy tone while still fighting for humanitarian and environmental concerns. Though it was now mixed with more introspective examinations of individual adversity, development, and perseverance, the whimsical optimism that had marked his earlier works remained. Both acclaim and persistent criticism fell on Denver because he never hid from his detractors or denied his shortcomings. Regrettably, John Denver's tragic demise in 1997 sparked fresh discussions around accountability, risk, and aviation safety. He was flying an experimental aircraft when it crashed near Pacific Grove, California, on October 12, 1997, killing him instantly. His age was a mere 53 years. The music industry was rocked by the devastating loss. In solidarity with the music community as they grieve the loss of a life-affirming and inspirational voice that has touched the lives of countless people, exposes John's shadowy past. After decades of silence, Annie Denver, now 78 years old, discusses her relationship with John Denver. Fans only know her for many years as the inspiration for Annie's song. Now, however, she speaks with clarity and calm reflection rather than bitterness. Her portrayal of their marriage is one of love and emotional instability, shaping a beautiful but troubled union. Denver freely acknowledges that his home life became increasingly unstable due to the pressures of his job and his personal issues. John revealed a shocking event in an interview he gave later in life, and he confirmed it in his memoirs. Out of his wrath, he sliced their marriage bed in half with a chainsaw. Many people found fault with this admission, shedding a harsh light on a marriage that seemed perfect on the outside, but was actually quite problematic on the inside. Annie made it clear through her speech that the story that the audience believed, the one with the beautiful melodies and love lyrics, was partially false. Their 1982 divorce wasn't a cordial separation, but rather the result of intense emotional conflicts, as she confirming what insiders had believed for some time. She describes how emotionally draining and chaotic their home became due to John's outbursts. Even while she never publicly placed the blame on him, she now knows that his inability to maintain control during crucial periods contributed to the breakdown of their relationship. She broke her silence not to hold him accountable, but to reassert her right to her own experience and make sure their stories are told in full. Problems at home did not cease even as Denver's private issues surfaced. Many in the country music scene were skeptical of and critical of his career. Despite his immense popularity, several more traditional country singers thought he was too pop for their taste. His 1975 win of the CMA Entertainer of the Year award was the symbolic zenith of this backlash. As a theatrical flourish, co-host Charlie Rich set fire to the envelope that announced Denver's victory on stage, showing that Denver and the country elite are publicly at odds. His crossover popularity sparked a schism in the music industry, and that moment demonstrated it. Annie exemplifies the impact of the tension between being beloved by fans and being criticized by genre purists. Audiences and industry insiders were deeply divided by the immense strain that Denver's popularity generated. Even while her husband thought music could bring people together, the CMA incident showed that not everyone in Nashville was into his more eclectic approach. John made an effort to keep it a secret, but the emotional strain eventually seeped into their personal lives, adding to the pressure they were under as a couple already grappling with the demands of public attention and fame. Annie discloses that their marriage was plagued by emotional stress, as well as financial and regulatory concerns. The Internal Revenue Service audited John in the 1980s. The focus of the study was on his intricate financial situation, including royalties, concert earnings, charitable endeavors, and investments. The audit further strained an already troubled marriage, even though no criminal charges were ever brought. The strain on John from overseeing public funds, being under scrutiny from the law, and his charitable obligations, as Annie points out, contributed to the already unstable state of their relationship. Denver, undeterred, continued to pursue his life's true calling. He kept on with his determined life, music, and causes. His later work and public persona were shaped by the emotional wounds of their common past, according to Annie. In the years leading up to their divorce, his music took on more reflective themes, including a yearning for atonement, an acceptance of loss, and a quest for inner harmony. The emotional upheaval and complicated dynamics inside their once-cherished marriage are now directly linked to this change, according to Annie. The last chapter was terrible. Denver was killed in an airplane accident near Pacific Grove, California, on October 12, 1997, while flying an experimental plane. His age was a mere 53 years. Just like Annie's millions of fans, the loss rocked their world. She discusses the irony of the situation with a muted melancholy. A man who sang songs of freedom and flight before he tragically died in a turbulent plane crash. Annie admits in interviews conducted after his death that he was not legally allowed to fly due to his prior convictions for driving under the influence. As a result of his offenses in 1993 and 1994 for drunk driving, John had his pilot's medical certification revoked, according to her. Denver persisted in his love of flying despite the dangers posed by this restriction, a decision that Annie looks back on with sadness and regret. Without passing judgment, she stresses that it depicts a guy struggling with the conflicting demands of his heart and his responsibilities while continuing to follow his passions despite his constraints. There was a documented design issue with the plane that Denver flew, a fuel selector valve that is positioned behind the pilot's shoulder, which poses a challenge when trying to access it during flight. Because of the poorly thought-out design and lack of knowledge with the controls, the National Transportation Safety Board determined that Denver failed to successfully swap tanks at a crucial juncture. Annie acknowledges that John lacked proper training for this model and cites the NTSB's conclusions. Tragically, she says, the pilot's passion of the plane, its design defects, and his willful ignorance of safety regulations all came together in that one instant.